A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and a journey of 1,000 minis, 1,000 dungeon maps, and 1,000 virtual tabletop campaigns might just begin with one random item from your house. A toilet paper roll tube, to represent the pillar. A small figure from the toy box to represent the big giant villain. Maybe a plain piece of paper with some rough squiggles on it to represent the map boundaries. It might seem like a very humble place to start, but it's your place to start. And today's episode is all about D&D props, the progression, the journey, and the mindset for your growth along the prop pipeline. But first, I'm your host, Tanner Wayland, and welcome to How to Be a Better DM, the show for big DMs, little DMs, and DMs who are just right. Just kidding. There is no just right for DMs, and that's great. In fact, that's a big part of the message that I want to share with this episode. There's no right way to do props and minis, so long as it's your way. Here's a few examples of what your personal prop journey might look like. 1, maybe you don't feel like you have a hand for creating maps yourself, so you like to purchase fleshed out and designed maps online, maybe some printed ones that fold up and come in a little catalog. But then you're like, you know what? I want a little bit more flexibility. And I don't like the idea of having to find little things to put on it. So you upgrade to doing a virtual tabletop on your laptop with some friends, and they bring their laptops, and it's, you have this nice map. You have little minis that you uploaded into the virtual tabletop you're using. It's wonderful. You love it. But then you're like, okay, using these separate laptops, kind of a pain. You saved up. You got a virtual tabletop. If not a table, then at least a mini table that you can put on top of your current one. And there you can actually have it much more visible. And maybe at that point you're feeling more comfortable about putting minis on top. Or you just keep it virtual again. Maybe eventually you have an upgrade to an actual built-in virtual tabletop table. And even if you don't do that, maybe you're like, okay, I really am liking where we're at with the virtual tabletop and with the map and everything, and I've got my minis in for the campaign. It's all prepped. Then maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to start. I want to build the immersion, so I create some props, like little potions for players to use that have the healing die inside them. Maybe it's the lighting in the room, and being able to change that to fit the mood. Now, let's say a second DM out there, maybe you start out very simple, random items on the table, like I mentioned before. Random toys to represent different creatures, random toothpicks to represent logs, whatever it is. And then you're like, okay, I still don't like putting in a lot of individual work and buying stuff. I happen to have a little whiteboard. Let me put that on there. And I'm going to draw out a grid. And that way we know how far the players are moving. And then you're like, okay, now I'm feeling good about that. You know what? Let me try and, I don't want to just do this for random battles. I'm going to start drawing the terrain on the whiteboard for the players to deal with. And then it starts out just like being random blobs to represent boulders or parts of the cave system, whatever it is. Eventually you start getting better at it. Soon, your little blobs become little bushes, and your general descriptions start getting reflected in what you're doing on the whiteboard. Soon, maybe you're even like, you know what? I still like keeping it low key, but maybe I could add some three-dimensionality to it. And you do, like we've talked about in past episodes, where you get some styrofoam, you carve it up a little bit. Maybe you paint it, or you just dip it in some colored something or other that you have. Maybe you spray paint it with a little bit of leftover spray paint from another project. Maybe you just rub a little dirt on it, and then it adds to the vibe. And then soon that little bit of styrofoam terrain becomes, you're gluing a little bit of grass onto some stuff. Maybe you're bringing in actual little rocks. Maybe you are doing the same to, just using stuff around the house to create very interesting creatures and settings and trees and everything. And suddenly your whiteboard and your table and the random objects has gotten a certain amount of personality to it. Or maybe you're like a third DM who, you're not too worried. You do a simple map, you do simple other stuff, but you really like minis. You love the vibe that they bring to a game. You love how it really just brings some artistry into, and some personal love into how the players play with their minis and how they fight the enemies. So you start out just buying minis, only occasionally, and you reuse a lot of them. Maybe you get them from a very cheap place. Like I know a lot of people who start out getting them from Amazon or from Temu or something else, just very cheap. And then you're like, okay, this is fine, but eventually, let's say that you have a friend or you yourself are able to procure a 3D printer. And you're like, oh my goodness, the world has just opened up. And suddenly you start 3D printing a bunch of stuff, within reason, as much as you can justify making, but you start doing it a lot more. And then you're like, okay, these are really cool, but I'd really rather that they weren't all the same color. So you start looking up online and you're like, oh, let's look up some painting tutorials. You get a simple little paint kit and then you start working on it. And initially it's pretty simple. It's pretty basic, pretty, not a lot of shading going on for sure, or blending, just stark lines and maybe some obvious mistakes here and there. But you're proud of it. And then soon you pick up some more tips. You're giving each mini a little dark wash so it has that extra shading and the shadowy vibe to it, and it looks a little bit worn. Maybe even eventually you're like, you know what? I'd love to design my own 3D minis. And so you bring out something like Blender or some other way to integrate it and make it work for your designs. And then you're cooking. Either way, even if you don't fall into one of those three type of DM prop pipelines or paths, maybe there's a different one. But in any case, not everyone starts out being amazing at some things, right? Whatever path or interest you have, just know that it's hard to master everything. The ambiance, the minis, the map, the virtual setup, the player props. Everything takes a different, if sometimes adjacent, set of skills and varying levels of expense. We know this, right? Because if everyone just had all the money in the world, we all probably would just go crazy and go and try and get an amazing setup like we see with Dimension 20 or Critical Role or any of the other content creators who make amazing setups, right? But, for the rest of us, rather than wishing for all of it and being disappointed that it's a really hard or high bar to meet, maybe just take ownership of specific things and learn to be patient about the rest. Because like I said, it's easy to be dissatisfied when we're comparing ourselves against, a level that is truly unrealistic. But you're missing the joy out of all of it, right? Those setups are incredibly immersive and breathtaking, but they're also produced. They have whole teams working on them. In fact, they're able to do a lot because they make money from it. But it still takes a lot of work. Just because they're making money from it and just because it has a high production value doesn't mean that they're not, busting their butts to make it. And can I tell you, them having it is one thing. I bet they're a lot more proud about the process to make it what it was, right? To make the scenery and to, for the DM to work with the team or they themselves to work on creating the minis and to choose a design that looks spectacular, right? It's not just about the end product. It's about the journey and the decisions to make it. There's a concept that I've heard from multiple places before, recently in therapy, but also in philosophy, religion, and just from people who've pursued hobbies and life in general. The concept is phrased very clearly and simply in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series. It is journey before destination. Or some people, outside of the book, might be like journey over destination. It's the concept that the journey is the valuable part, right? That regardless of the destination, if the journey itself isn't that valuable, why are you doing it, right? If you can't find some joy and some fulfillment in the growth process, then maybe you're off track. You've got to learn to appreciate the self-development, to appreciate the growth, to appreciate starting out terribly and then seeing yourself grow, regardless of how well the end point or destination of that growth matches up against others, right? So what the heck does this lofty idea have to do with D&D props? It's kind of funny to mash them together because it's like, oh, journey over to destination, your life, D&D props. It is maybe a big stretch, but in my mind, I was just thinking about it, and for me, I'm a perfectionist. I'm someone who likes to reach, to imagine, to wish for more, which sometimes is good. Other times, it makes me feel inadequate. It makes me not pursue something because it won't match up to my expectations. And I think that I'm missing the whole point. And I think many of us are missing the whole point when it comes to D&D props. It's super fun to see that journey, right? To see where you started, or if you're a player, to see where your DM started and then where they end up, just with continual improvement, right? I think that especially it's easy to forget as DMs that, like, hey, for all of your work, the players notice, even if you start out very simply. Because I've been in in plenty of games where the setup was very simple. It was just a whiteboard with a grid on it and some squiggles, and the boss was a giant in comparison, a giant octopus squeaky toy from their kid's bathtub. And it's one of those things where I was like, you know what? It's so funny in the moment when you have that dissonance, I guess you could call it, where you're like, oh, what they're describing and then this little thing on the board. But it still helps. Like, every little bit helps. It helps your players get involved and to see what they're working with. And then you also get to have the laugh of being like, oh, this is not perfect, but that's, what? Proud of you, right? And then when you get better at it, when you're like, hey, you know what? I didn't have everything at the start, but now little by little, I've got, a set of tricks, a set of props, a set of things that I've either created or found or sourced that worked out really well. And that's wonderful. So you can find ways to wow your players and wow yourself if you just start. And so that's my challenge. Pick one prop or aspect of the scenery. Maybe it's, the map, the minis, the landscape, the player props, whatever it is, and choose to start your journey with developing it today. So start with something small during your next session. Like, just choose one aspect, like I mentioned before, and during your next session, bring it. Maybe the simplest version of it that you can get your hands on. And then before your next session after that, find a way that you can add some personality to it. Maybe it is you just get a little paintbrush and you just, maybe you're like, hey, you know what? All I have is toilet paper roll holder and some red and yellow paint. I'm going to make this look like a pillar of fire. And at one point, it's going to be a sick moment where I have my enemy, cast a pillar of fire on the enemy. And I'm going to actually surround the little token that they're using as their mini in this toilet paper roll, inside part. And it's going to be painted somewhat like flames. And that's going to be a sick moment. And it's going to be very funny. And you're going to be like, oh, I could never build on this. But then you're like, oh, could I not start making this a whole joke thing? And then suddenly your entire combat's pillar based because all you're dealing with is a bunch of toilet paper roll holders, right? And now this is an extreme example, but it's just an example of what it can be like if you're like, you know what, regardless of what I think is the most important, I'm going to grab for something that is reachable, and I'm going to commit to improving little by little. So that's your challenge. Pick one thing, work on it little by little, session to session, and see how it evolves and how it grows and how you grow, and appreciate that for what it is. I hope that's a fun time for you. And until next time, let's roll initiative.